Hey, Kisha. I know that we just had our little conversation before hitting record just now as like our pre-interview, pre-conversation before diving into this one. But I just want to get really centered right now and present to why I decided to have you as my first guest and first conversation around what I feel is super close to my heart right now, which is conversations around healing. And I thought of you because you came into my life through your husband, Matt, over 1 year ago, I would say. We
Has
met.
it been that
I feel
long?
like it's already been over 1 year. And since then, you've been such an inspiration to me in how vulnerable you've been in your journey and what you've taken on in your life to truly and completely love yourself, heal, and take on what it means to break cycles, which is some of the hardest work to possibly take on in this life, especially, in the times that we're in. And I feel that you're somebody that I wanted to have on here to share that relatability and share a bit of your story because I feel like it will also inspire so many others and just open up maybe other people to feel like they're not alone with what they've experienced. And I just want to thank you for wanting to be in this with me and agreeing to be a part of this conversation.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Healing is something that I spent a very long time, probably the majority of my life, just dealing with. And it's something that I still deal with every single day. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about healing is that when you do the work, you're done and it never finishes. It's a lifelong journey of progressing. And so I'm so grateful to be along this journey with you and your healing journey and to have had my experience inspire you as well. That is all I've ever wanted to if I just inspire one person to do the work, like that's all I care about.
Hmm.
So yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I can see that about you, that you're doing it from the heart, and that's the best
Mhm.
place to be ultimately when you are putting yourself out there or in general when you're taking on this work, is that it's authentically connected. So I just want to start right there is let's start off the conversation by if you were to define healing, what does healing mean to you?
It's a very good question. I think healing for me means reclaiming my power. Because a lot of the time when you're stuck in trauma, you're stuck in patterns, you feel like you are powerless. You feel like life is just happening at you, it's happening around you rather than you being in the driver's seat of your life. And so healing is about taking accountability for my own thoughts and my own beliefs and my words and my actions and actually choosing the life that I want, taking back responsibility and that power that comes with being here and having this human experience.
Wow. Already in itself, it's like that just reclaiming that, right, is something that I feel is a pivotal part of everybody's journey at some point is realizing like where did we give that power up some point along the way? And the fact that you're in that space of reclaiming that and coming back to your wholeness is amazing. And on the topic of, reclaiming your power, was there a pivotal experience or something that happened in your life in particular that you feel nudged you along that inner work and healing journey?
Yeah, I definitely would say that where my healing journey actually began was when I was about 23 years old. Um, During that time, like it was a very pivotal moment in my life because I would say that I was high functioning depression, like that's what I was experiencing, high functioning depression, where I was crying in my car every single day, coming home from work. During that time, I was experiencing really painful periods. They were kind of all over the place. My weight was going up and down. I had cystic acne that had been brewing for a couple of years at this point. And specifically at 23, I found a cyst in my chest, in my breast. And it felt as though my entire life was falling apart. Um, Usually when your life is falling apart, it's the universe or your higher self telling you that things need to change. And that was the wake up call that I needed. That's what I call it, my wake up call.
Mhm.
Um, I got to a point where I looked around and I felt like there was no one around me whose life I wanted. Not my coworkers, not my boss, not my family, not my friends, like whoever. Like there was no one that I really looked up to as a mentor to aspire to be like. And when you enter a situation like that, you really need to get yourself in a different room so there are more people to aspire to be like. Um, my father had just died. He died from cancer just a couple years before that. And that in and of itself, dealing with that trauma and that grief was something that I never dealt with. So the accumulation of my childhood, repressed emotions, just where I was in the state of my life, and of course, dealing with that grief, it materialized in my life in different ways. And that's the symptoms that I started seeing. And I realized that by suppressing my emotions because I didn't have time to deal with them, that was no longer an excuse. And I was faced with the fact that if I didn't change anything, I probably would not have made it past the age of 30.
Oh,
And so that was the catalyst towards my healing journey to deal
wow.
with that. Mhm.
Thanks for sharing that. Um, it sounds like it wasn't just one thing, it was many things at once, which in and itself is a heck of a lot to deal with. And then
Yeah.
add on top of that, like that feeling of when you mentioned high functioning depression, which is a very real thing. It's a very
Mhm.
real thing that it's like needing to still be productive and move forward and show up and be carrying this weight on your shoulders, which it sounds like you were dealing with at that point in your life. So, um, on that note of like dealing with high functioning depression and having all of that happen at once, like how would you describe like your symptoms in high functioning depression day to day? Like I know you mentioned a little bit of the crying, but was it something that you felt that you could be vulnerable with, or was it something that you had to mask and hide in your life at that point?
I think at that point, I'd lived the majority of my life kind of secluded. I was raised very Christian. There was a lot of places we weren't allowed to go. There was a lot of things that we weren't allowed to do. I was raised in the Seventh-day Adventist church. They have a lot of rules, which by all means, I love my upbringing in the church and everything. It was something very near and dear to my heart. But the way that my family embraced it, it was kind of, we don't talk about what's going on inside the home. We don't talk about mental health. In a lot of Black families, mental illness does not even exist. It's not a topic that we even discuss. And for most of my life, I had responded to my upbringing and my experience with people pleasing behavior. So I would keep all of what I was feeling to myself in order to make sure that the people around me were okay. I was such a good friend to my friends. I was such a great ally to my parents in any way that I could be as a child. But I was very much concerned with how I would be perceived and how my trauma would affect other people. And so I kept all of that bottled in. It was a very lonely experience. In terms of high functioning depression, I would say that it was kind of masking what was going on. I was always smiling. I was always showing other people that kindness and that love, and a lot of it came from not being able to show that to myself.
Wow. I
Mhm.
can very much relate to that experience of people pleasing. And I think many people who grow up in a religious household or even just as a female in general, like we learn certain traits around that people pleasing in order for our survival and for being liked and validated and seen. And I can't believe that so many experiences, although different, have so much crossover. And I feel like a lot of what you shared, I can even see in myself and in my own times in life that I've gone through where people pleasing and pretending everything's okay and trying to make sure everybody else is taken care of can ultimately, you think, be the thing that gets you that feeling of like connection, but ultimately takes you further away from yourself at times.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and when you were going through this period and you were like, okay, this might be whether you knew it or not, this was the catalyst for something to change and it was the catalyst for healing. Was there any books or people or experiences or things that helped you on your journey that kind of were the things that like pushed you along in that moment where you knew you had to make a change?
Definitely. being a part of the church from a very young age, being born and raised in the church, there's a lot of different Bible verses and poems and prayers that I still sing to this day and talk about. One of them in particular was the Serenity Prayer. Have you ever heard of that before?
Yeah.
God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. And that is one of those prayers that really stayed very close to my heart whenever I looked at situations that as a child you don't have control over. You know, you're born into a family, you're born into a life, you don't really choose how that plays out, but just understanding what things you can control. I think that in my life, there's a lot of movies that I watched as well growing up. One in particular was Coach Carter.
Mm.
Um, you, I know
That's a
that
good
you
one.
recently, such a good one. Recently, you shared on your stories my absolute favorite poem, Our Deepest Fear by Marianne Williamson. Basically, that our deepest fear is not that we're inadequate. It's actually how powerful that we can actually be. And by standing in that power and standing in who you are, unabashed and unashamed, you encourage other people to do the same. And I kind of always felt as a child that my story, no matter how hard it was, no matter what happened to me, was something that could inspire other people. I always envisioned that, like, you know, those moments when you're crying in your room, I'm like, if they made a story about my life, this would be so inspirational, you know?
Yeah. You're having your
Oh,
your movie moment there where it's like you get that perspective where you're almost able to look like at yourself in it and say like even as hard as this is right now, like this will be my story one day and this is my story unfolding right now. And I feel like
absolutely.
that's what it sounded like for you at those times where it was like you had that inner strength still or your higher self like you said pushing you along to say like this is my story and I will make it through and I can share this one day, which you're doing even right now. It's already a part of it.
Full circle.
Do you
Yeah,
feel like some of the things that you experienced that led you to a place of where everything came to a head was some learned behaviors that came generationally?
absolutely. Absolutely. I think things that I didn't even recognize were happening around me. When you're so young, um, you're observing. You're always observing and trying to make sense of the world, and it governs how you then act in the world. And a lot of those behaviors and things that I was exposed to became a core part of my identity. I think back to, you know, as I was healing kind of like my cultural identity, like who I was and how I experienced this world as a Black woman, as a someone from Caribbean descent. It was really hard to connect with that identity, understanding that the world sees me a particular type of way, regardless of how I felt about it. But in terms of healing that identity, there was a plethora of books that I read. Three of them being, you know, the most monumental in my journey. There was Real Cool, um, Anti-Woman, and All About Love by Bell Hooks. And specifically in the book We Real Cool, Bell Hooks talks about some of the relationship dynamics that we have with our parents, specifically from a Black perspective. So she presented basically um, a situation where you have a white mother and a Black mother, and the way that they would talk about their children. So the white mother would be like, "Oh my God, my son is doing amazing. He's doing great. I love him. He's so this, he's so wonderful. He's so smart." And oftentimes the Black mother would actually talk down to their child. They would say, or they minimize their accomplishments. And this is not because they're trying to be mean, not because they're trying to put their children down, but it's a subconscious action. So the Black mother would be like, "Oh, my son, he's okay. He's all right. He's doing okay." But where that comes from is after the transatlantic slave trade. I mean, it only took 2 generations to completely disconnect these lost children, these stolen children, from their cultural identity, from where they came from. Even right now, a lot of people are struggling with that because there's really no records to go back and find where that identity was. What was that spirituality? What was that culture? There's a disconnect. So within 2 generations, you now have people born into slavery, and oftentimes they would be ripped apart. Like families would be completely ripped apart by, the daughters being sent to different plantations, the sons being sent to different plantations, the fathers nowhere to be found. That it's one of the generational trauma markers that we see in Black families. And a part of that was when Black women were, these enslaved Black women were in the fields, let's say, for example, if they spoke highly of their daughters and their sons, they would likely be ripped away from them. So
Oh,
a daughter that they praised for how beautiful she was, and everyone in the community talked about how beautiful the daughter was, she would most likely be taken by their enslavers as their plaything, right? So in
wow.
order to protect your daughter, you'd speak bad, not bad, but you'd speak negatively about the way that she looks. So
Right.
no one else clues in and thinks that she's beautiful. And for your son, if he did really well, if he listened really well, if he was, if he behaved very well and you praised him, he'd be taken away and sent to a different plantation so that the owner could get more money, right? So that security, that safety became speaking down to your children in order to protect them. So it's coming out of a place of love. But 400 years after that has happened, we're still doing the same thing without the actual lived experience of that survival mode. We're no longer in survival, yet those habits are still being continued and recycled again and again. And I think that it's only in this generation that we're actually recognizing what those traumas are because we have access to information to go down that rabbit hole. So, in terms of healing generational trauma, it's not just healing it for yourself, it's healing it for the people that have come before you, and it's healing it for the people that will come after you, how you treat your children, how you even treat yourself. Because your children, once again, are observing you. They're observing how you talk to yourself, how you speak to their father, how you speak to their mother. They're observing every single thing that we do.
Mm,
Mhm.
my goodness. So eloquently put and incredibly shared. I think it's such important information that I didn't even know about. And the fact that you're right, we do have access to this information now, and that ability to understand how some of these things passed on in certain cultures generationally are these behaviors that we for so long didn't maybe recognize where they actually rooted from and came from. But in knowing that, you're right, you're not only healing for you just now, you're healing for past generations and you're healing for those future generations. And what a responsibility truly that is to take on. And like
Mhm.
it really sounds like, and this is why I commend you so much for the work you are doing, because this is real work. To have to
Mhm.
be able to look back there and understand your history and understand what it might have been like, and then how it could impact you today, and how if you don't maybe subconsciously change those patterns and cycles within you, how those can still continue to be passed on. And it's just, that's why I love having conversations like this, because not only do I get to learn from your experience and what you learned along your journey and doing this work, but also it's bringing forth this importance to people of our generation right now, which is to actually look into their culture, their generations that came before them, understand why things are the way they are. Because in having that understanding, we have that ability to shift our behavior, right? Accordingly and understand where it comes from. So I really appreciate that you shared those book recommendations and also just what you learned specifically from that experience. Wow. Like
Yeah.
that one is powerful. And I feel like a lot of this healing work that we're doing ties a lot into the inner child work. And I want to touch upon the inner child and ask you how your relationship is with your inner child. Do you have a relationship with her?
Oh, absolutely. She's my best friend. Definitely. And she hasn't been for a very long time.
Mm,
So being able to say that my inner child is my absolute best friend is something I never even dreamed that I'd be able to talk about or to share or to experience. I just remember as a very, very young child, maybe about 3 years old, I was one of those people that was very extroverted. I was always talking to people. I was a natural born healer. I would go to people all the time, and if they were having a bad day, I would sing them a song.
oh,
I'd say words of encouragement. Yeah, all the time, all the time.
oh,
It didn't matter who they were. if I sensed that someone was having a really hard time or there was a little trickle in their voice that didn't quite sound right, I was in tune to that. And I would tell them the words that they needed to hear at 3 years old. What did I know? But um, I was also someone who was mixing potions in my mom's bathroom all the time. I was mixing, bath salts and fragrances. And basically, my inner child was saying that I was born to be a healer and I was born to be a scientist. And for a very long time, all of that went away into a closet. And I became very, I don't know if the word is ashamed of that, but I didn't feel free to express that part of myself. I remember it was like distinctly around 9 years old that my report cards in school stopped coming back saying, Kisha talks too much. Kisha's always asking questions. And all of a sudden, I got report cards now saying, Kisha doesn't talk enough. Kisha
Wow.
doesn't ask questions. At 9 years old, there was a change, and I completely lost connection with that inner child for the rest of my childhood, through my teen years, through my young adult years, completely disconnected. And now being able to go back through some of those, well, all of those parts that I put in a closet, doing that shadow work and actually sitting in that darkness, sitting in that loss and that grief and all of those uncomfortable feelings, it allowed me to find that little 9-year-old who needed some encouragement, who needed love. And by pouring into that 9-year-old self of me, I reconnected with my purpose, with curiosity, with divinity, with spirituality. And I am just that same 3-year-old, that's that 3-year-old spirit who was just so open to the world and so truly full of love and wonder. I feel like I'm embodying that once more. And it's truly a powerful experience to do so.
That's so beautiful,
Mm.
genuinely so beautiful. And it really just confirms to me in hearing your experience that children really come into this world, I feel, a lot more wise than we give credit for. And with
Mhm.
gifts that need to be nurtured because those gifts are not for any, like, no reason. They're for
Mhm.
a reason. And ultimately it's almost like your truest essence was always there. And then things came in the way, right? That gets on top of that. And now like coming back to your inner child is revealing the removing those layers of parts that aren't you or that people told you you should be ashamed of or people told you that like oh you're too much of this you're not enough of this and then coming back and reclaiming that wholeness of you and that younger Kisha is a beautiful experience as you're mentioning because it's like she's always been there, she didn't go anywhere.
It's crazy. We spend so much of our lives just trying to fit in and be like everyone else. And then
Yes.
at 17 years old, they're like, what do you want to be? And you're like, I don't remember. I don't know. I
Hmm.
have no idea. And then you spend the rest of your life trying to figure out who that 3-year-old was or who that 9-year-old was in the first place. It would be so wonderful if we stopped losing that person.
Hmm. Definitely. This, I know I sent you questions before this, but now you're bringing forth a question in me and you don't have to answer it, but I just feel I need to ask it and it's I know that you've mentioned to me before that you want to have kids one day.
Mhm.
And I don't know if that's still true or not, but if you did want to have kids one day, do you feel that you want to parent in such a way where you allow those gifts to be nurtured? And how would you bring that forth potentially in
That's
your
a
future
very good
children?
question. Very good question. And of course, the answer is definitely yes. An astounding yes, which
Oh.
that in and of itself is something I 5 years ago would not have said, but definitely. And the way that I really want to go about nurturing that curiosity is allowing my children to show me who they are. Like you said, children, I believe, are born very connected to spirit. They know who they are, they know what they do. That's one of the reasons why, in a lot of ancient societies, especially this is in the East, they used to give, well, in this case, was kings. the heir apparent, they used to put a bunch of toys in front of him, one that's more geared towards mathematics, one that's a scientific toy, and see what the child gravitated towards, because the child knows who they are.
Mm.
And so when you have children, if there's things that they gravitate towards, be it, singing to heal people or mixing potions or taking things apart to understand how they work, clue into that because they're telling you what they do, what they like, what is their purpose. And so when my children do show me what they're interested in, it's my responsibility then to put them in places where they would have the opportunity to hone those skills and experience whatever it is that they want to do. It's my opportunity to guide them along that journey. I heard before that parents are simply guides when children come to this world. We're showing them like this is the human experience. We're not supposed to tell them what to do. We don't have the answers. We don't know what they're supposed to do. No child comes with a handbook, but we're supposed to just guide them along this human experience and let them be in control of their lives. So that's kind of the philosophy that I want to take with raising my children.
Beautiful. I love that so much. And I feel like as much as you can try to teach your kids, they're teaching you probably in the same time because, like you said, they are really truly so connected to spirit and their own essence. And I believe more adults can learn through children and just witnessing their behavior, the way they interact with the world, the way they interact with you. And if we could tap into more of that innate wisdom, I think the world would be a different place completely. But I'm excited for you one day when that time comes and it's going to be a beautiful experience for you. And I see it for you wholeheartedly. And yeah, just I know that the work you're doing is just going to make you the ultimate guide for the next generation. I do want to talk about because you mentioned you love to mix potions, and I feel like that's still true about you nowadays. Like I've been to your house before, and you're like, do you feel like having a tea? And I'm like, yeah, I could use a tea. Okay, let me just whip you up a little something here. And it ends up being like the best thing I've ever drank. And I just want to know, like, how has herbs and elixirs and like natural products that you really tapped into doing as a passion helped you also in your healing?
Definitely. I would say that herbalism and that journey is me reconnecting with that inner child for sure. And I told you a couple weeks ago I started a naturopathy course,
Yeah.
specialized in energetic herbalism, which takes a very traditional approach to herbs. And I would say that this experience and uh, this learning experience that I'm going through is truly bringing me back into alignment with nature's cycles. And so not just the herbs, but reconnecting with, the menstrual cycle and how, that cyclical nature is embedded in every single woman, how we're supposed to be in attune with the earth, attuned with the moon, attuned with the way that this ecosystem is designed to function. In today's society, we are very disconnected from the natural order, the natural way that things go. And we kind of create our own order where it shouldn't be. And so reconnecting with this herbalism side really encourages you to slow down. Like, where are you going? Where are you rushing? Slow
Mhm.
down and connect with the world, connect with the earth. When you're drinking a tea, connect with the energetic spirit of that plant, because that's where healing comes from. The plants, I sound really very connected. Sometimes my husband and I were like, we need to speak to other people to just make we don't sound a little, off. But what I've learned in my studies through studying like First Nations and their practices is that all living things have a spirit. Every single, this could be water, this could be earth, this could be plants, trees, animals, everything has a spirit. It has its own energy, just like we do as humans. And so when you are using these herbs, it's kind of that give and take experience where you're exchanging energies with this other spiritual being having its own experience. And that is really where healing comes from. It's not from, peppermint gives you energy. No, it's the energy of peppermint that is healing your body. It's teaching you how to be in balance, how to be in equilibrium. And from understanding that equilibrium, I mean, that saved my life. When I went through my period where I had the cyst in my chest, I went to a naturopath, and I guess that's what kickstarted that journey. But she really taught me how to get into sync with my body using food, herbs, and of course, natural products to do that as well. And one thing with that, I think, first of all, I think it's really beautiful, this shift that everyone is making towards more environmentally conscious products and cosmetics and everything of that nature. I think it's also to be very mindful of how much nature we're using. So just being mindful that there are a lot of plants that are actually going extinct because of our overuse, over harvesting, monocropping of these herbal products to, help the environment. It's actually making a very devastating effect on the environment. Um, I mean, for example, I mean, you can even say like essential oils, for example, that has been sweeping the nature in. It's a $15 billion industry, I think they said by 2025. It takes about 10,000 rose petals to produce just 5 milliliters of rose essential oil. Like that's a lot for a tiny vial, right? Yeah, I'm kind of a nerd about this stuff, but I think it was what, 2016, there was the world renowned scientist. So this is like Kew in like the Royal Botanic Gardens. This is WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, and a few others. But basically, they got together and they did a study to understand what was going on with plant life. So basically, we use about, I think it's like 300 to 400,000 plants worldwide. Sorry, there are about 300 to 400,000 plants worldwide. And we use about 30 to 60,000 of them for medicine as well as cosmetics. Now, of those plants that we used, about 60 to 90% of these plants are harvested from the wildlife. So we just go into nature and we harvest them from there. Of course, we're disrupting ecosystems, like that's number one. But number two, of these plants that are being harvested, they did a study of about 7 of these plants, and they found that 1 in 5 of the most common plants that we use every day are at risk of extinction.
Wow.
Extinction, literally because we're choosing to get like hemp products versus non-natural materials, or we're choosing to use cleaner ingredients in our cosmetics, which is wonderful, great for the environment, but we have to think about how much we are impacting the environment by our consumption, by not knowing how to grow our own plants and actually being involved in this system. It's not just a band-aid by getting a cleaner product or using vegan labeled products. There are small places in the wildlife that are supporting a global demand. Like,
That's that is
mhm.
a staggering fact and statistic to learn about the plants that I didn't even know
Yeah.
about myself. But what it really brings home is that when we're so disconnected from the processes, that we just see the final product of something and don't understand from very beginning of that plant's life to then how it's harvested and how it ends up in our bottle that we're then using to diffuse, right? We don't understand that process, so many of us, and not understanding it, we dissociate from the very energetics in nature itself, which is the thing that's providing for us and that we're very much using, taking without giving back. And it
Mhm.
sounds like in what you're learning, just you're really taking on this symbiotic relationship between wanting to understand the way plants and these species can heal us, but also being able to give back to nature just as much, which is so important because, like you said, these are very much powerful spirits, plants, and things that are able to give us as human beings so much, but we're not the only life force on this planet that's keeping this whole ecosystem together. And therefore, like, what is our involvement in that process? And I love that you're doing this research and you're understanding the deeper connection to it. Um, wow. Like it sounds like you you're very much going to be like a spokesperson for helping us get back into like growing our own herbs and food, which I think is so important too. And I know that's something that's close to your heart and what you want to take on in the future. So yeah, I thank you for sharing that and sharing some really important facts with me too.
Mhm. My pleasure.
For somebody who is taking on a path of healing, I know healing is a very broad term, but let's just keep it broad for this particular question. For somebody who's taking on a path of healing, what advice would you give someone who wants to heal themselves?
What advice would I give to someone who wants to heal themselves? I would say the number one thing is understand that you are more capable of what you think you are capable of. And it's simply by making new agreements with yourself. There's a quote that says, the man who says he can and the man who says he cannot are both right. It's about your mentality and how you see things. Anything that you want, you can manifest. And by manifest, I mean doing the work, doing the action to create the life that you desire. But it starts with you. And oftentimes that journey is very uncomfortable. And you'll see your entire life falling apart. That's exactly where I was as well. But if you feel uncomfortable, if you feel like your life is falling apart, you're losing your friends, your family, your coworkers, whatever the case may be, you are in the right place. The universe has a way of making you change, and it doesn't give you a opportunity to cop out of that, to
Mm,
stay in your comfort zone. It will force you out of comfort. And when you get to that point, know that it's for a reason, it's for a purpose, and you are exactly where you're supposed to be.
mm,
Mhm.
amazing. It's that mentality switch of why is this happening for me instead of why is this happening to me?
Mhm.
And I truly do believe the same as you that the universe does put us into those dark nights of the soul, those places where it feels seemingly like everything is falling apart in order to give us that opportunity to truly meet ourselves and rebuild from there and actually be able to start from a slate of being able to create the lives that we really want for ourselves. And it's only through that process of needing to almost like die to yourself and like get rid of so many things that you once clung to your identity that you can actually then really shape into what you want for your future. So
Yeah.
that's such powerful information to share and an amazing tip and advice. And my last question for you would be, what advice, knowing what you know now, would you give your younger self?
My younger self, I would definitely say to give yourself or give myself grace. Don't be so hard on yourself. I was incredibly hard on myself with the expectations that I placed on myself that were based on other people's expectations of me. It wasn't my own um, thought. But also not to feel shame for the person that I had to become in order to survive.
Mm,
Your circumstances bring out a lot in you. Whatever, whatever you experience, whatever you see, it shapes who you are. But understand that that's not who you are. That shadow self, that person that had to blossom in order for you to be who you are right now, that is a very fundamental part of your identity. That is not all of who you are, but you now have the opportunity with that hindsight, with that wisdom to choose differently. And you can always choose differently.
mm. Thank
Mm,
you. Thank you
of
so
course.
much, Keisha. Thank you for your vulnerability and for tapping into so many important truths that you shared with me and with anybody else who's going to be watching this. And I really, really am inspired by you and the woman that you are for yourself mostly and the world, because the more that you are embodying the truest Keisha, the more that is the greatest contribution I feel that you can make to our
Aw.
planet at this time. So thank you for allowing me witnessing you and your flourishing and your beauty and everything that you're taking on. I learned so much from it. And thanks for just being in this conversation with me today.
It's my absolute pleasure, and thank you for inviting me.
Of course.